March 24, 1941, Quonset Point Naval Air Station, Rhode Island. The Atlantic wind rattled the corrugated steel of half-finished hangars. Inside, a handful of engineers huddled over blueprints, coffee cups forgotten at their elbows. They had 60 days to solve a problem the Navy said couldn't be solved. What they built would change the shape of war and outlast the men who designed it. The world was teetering on the edge of destruction. Europe had been at war for nearly 2 years. Cities burned, ports smoldered, and armies moved in endless campaigns across deserts, plains, and frozen rivers. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched, preparing quietly while still claiming neutrality. But neutrality did not protect infrastructure, and it did not protect planning. At Quonset Point, the Navy faced a challenge that was less about bullets and more about time and ingenuity. They needed portable, durable, and fast-to-assemble buildings, shelters that could be raised anywhere in the world by men with no prior construction experience. The structures had to survive wind, rain, and enemy action, yet be lightweight enough to ship across oceans and fit in cramped cargo holds. The British had solved part of the problem with the Nissen hut, in use since the First World War. Its curved shell could be raised by 6 men in roughly 90 minutes, and it had proven effective in the harsh climates of Europe and North Africa. But for the Americans, it was too slow, too inefficient. America's military planners wanted something faster, simpler, and more versatile. They needed innovation, not imitation. The Navy turned to the George A. Fuller Company, a construction firm known for skyscrapers, bridges, and urban projects, not military shelters. Engineers accustomed to long timelines and careful calculations suddenly found themselves facing impossible deadlines. 60 days to design a building that could be mass-produced and deployed worldwide. 60 days to build a prototype that would determine how the U.S. Army and Navy would house tens of thousands of men in the coming war. Inside the drafting room, the air smelled of oil, graphite, and metal. Blueprints were pinned to the walls, smudged from overuse. Engineers bent over them for hours, measuring arcs, testing angles, and recalculating loads. The first sketches were elegant but flawed. Curved walls like those of the Nissen hut wasted interior space. They made floors awkward, furniture impractical, and construction more difficult than the Navy had envisioned. But necessity drives invention. The team experimented with steel ribs, modular flooring, and prefabricated panels. Every piece was tested for strength and simplicity. Rivets were measured to the millimeter. Bolts were counted twice. Engineers debated materials late into the night. Would thinner steel reduce weight at the cost of durability? Could aluminum panels withstand the heat of the Pacific sun? Could a design work for Greenland's icy winds as well as for the tropics of the Solomon Islands? Outside the Quonset Point workshops, the world seemed frozen in anticipation. The hum of engines, the distant whistle of ships, and the rhythm of waves on the docks formed a strange soundtrack to creation. Nobody knew exactly when the U.S. would enter the war, but everyone felt the urgency in their bones. Every blueprint carried the silent weight of lives to come. Every bolt promised shelter or death, depending on whether the design succeeded. By May 1941, the first full-scale prototypes were rising from the floors of Quonset Point. Engineers watched as half-moon steel shells formed over skeletal frames. They measured angles, adjusted braces, and timed assembly. What had begun as sketches on vellum was now a tangible solution, a building designed for speed, mobility, and survival. The men in Rhode Island could not yet imagine the environments their designs would endure. They could not foresee tropical storms battering newly erected huts or snow-crushing roofs in Alaska. They did not know which of their ideas would save lives and which would force redesigns in the midst of battle. All they knew was that this building, this curved shell of steel, would carry the weight of war in ways no human could alone. In the quiet of the night, as the Atlantic wind rattled against unfinished steel, the engineers paused. They listened to the sound of creation, metal bending, rivets clanging, the low hum of the electric presses. In that sound was hope. In that silence, determination. It was a moment suspended between peace and chaos. The world still held its breath, but history had already begun. The Quonset hut was not yet perfect. It was not even complete, but it had a purpose, and purpose was the most powerful force in the coming storm. And in that Rhode Island workshop, amid the smell of oil and metal, the first lesson of war was learned. Necessity shapes invention, and invention shapes survival. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The morning sun reflected off calm waters, unaware of the chaos about to arrive. In minutes, the quiet was shattered, explosions, smoke, and fire turning the harbor into a vision of devastation. By nightfall, America was at war, and the shelters it had been designing in Rhode Island would suddenly become urgent necessities. The attack on Pearl Harbor was both a shock and a clarion call. Overnight, the United States was thrust from cautious preparation into the full demands of global conflict. The war that had felt distant became immediate, personal, and unrelenting. Across the mainland, factories and offices erupted in motion. Every engineer, draftsman, and factory worker understood the stakes. 16,000 Quonset huts had been ordered by the Army. They had to be designed, tested, and shipped, quickly, efficiently, and in enormous numbers. Nothing like this had been attempted before. In Rhode Island, the engineers at the George A. Fuller Company returned to the drafting tables with renewed urgency. For them, war was no longer a concept. It was a deadline written in steel. Rivets and panels became as critical as guns and ammunition. Every sketch, every measurement, every calculation mattered. The first prototypes of the T-rib Quonset hut had already been completed in May 1941. They were functional, yes, but flawed. Curved walls extended fully to the floor, wasting space. Soldiers in trial assemblies discovered that bunks couldn't be placed efficiently, and tables pressed awkwardly against slanted walls. Rain leaked along seams that looked precise on paper. Engineers now faced the challenge of redesigning a shelter while production lines were being scaled for immediate war needs. In factories across the United States, the war effort reshaped daily life. Women joined the assembly lines in unprecedented numbers, their hands shaping steel ribs, drilling panels, and loading crates bound for distant bases. Men who had once drawn skyscrapers now assembled portable homes for soldiers they would never meet. Lunch hours were brief, days were long, and the constant hum of presses, rivets, and welding torches became the new soundtrack of America at war. Ships began to carry the Quonset huts west across the Pacific. Crates packed tightly, stamped U.S. Navy property, held everything needed for assembly: bolts, steel panels, flooring, even small tools. Sailors unloading the crates often worked through monsoons, typhoons, and sweltering heat. They were untrained builders, following diagrams in conditions far harsher than any drafting room could simulate. In the Pacific, the huts became lifelines. On Guadalcanal, men raised them in hours, some under fire, some in torrential rain. They were makeshift hospitals, repair shops, command centers, and barracks. Inside, Marines wrote letters home, patched equipment, and slept under curved steel roofs that hummed with the wind. The huts carried life in environments designed to destroy it. Yet the engineers at Quonset Point could see the flaws. Reports arrived detailing wasted floor space, water leaks, and assembly difficulties in remote regions. The rush to deploy shelters revealed that speed alone was not enough. Efficiency had to meet practicality. Engineers began experimenting with vertical sidewalls, modified arches, and two-section assemblies, anticipating a version that would be faster, sturdier, and more versatile. In the background, global events surged. Europe's front lines demanded new bases. North Africa burned under sun and sand, and the jungles of the Pacific tested every design. The war was teaching lessons that no blueprint could fully capture, about logistics, climate, human endurance, and the unforgiving nature of conflict. Amid all this, individual stories emerged. A young Navy Seabee wrote home to his mother, "We're building homes in the middle of nowhere, with no training and no rest. Every bolt is a promise to someone out there, living, fighting, waiting for shelter. I never thought I'd be hammering metal while men are dying miles away." Another engineer noted in his journal, "I design for time and steel, but not for the fear I see in men's eyes. I wonder if this shelter will be enough when the bullets come." By the spring of 1942, the U.S. war machine was in full motion. Crates of Quonset huts shipped to Europe, the Pacific, and North Africa. Engineers continued to refine their designs. Every flaw discovered became a lesson, every success a quiet victory. The half-moon shelters, simple, unglamorous, efficient, became symbols of the industrial ingenuity that would sustain men far from home. The breaking point was not just Pearl Harbor. It was the realization that war demanded speed, precision, and human endurance in ways no one had imagined. And in the design rooms, factories, and docks, the engineers, laborers, and sailors faced a different kind of battlefield, one of deadlines, metal, and ingenuity. For a moment, history seemed to hold its breath. The world had shifted. The Quonset hut, still imperfect, was about to meet the storm it had been designed to survive. And in that moment, one question lingered quietly above the clatter of rivets. Could steel and human determination truly outpace the tide of war? June 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The air was thick with smoke and salt. Marines and Seabees unloaded crates stamped Quonset hut, U.S. Navy property. By nightfall, under rain and gunfire, steel shells rose from the jungle floor, half-moons of survival in a war that refused mercy. War is measured not in days or months, but in moments of endurance. The Quonset hut, once a blueprint on a Rhode Island drafting table, now faced the crucible of combat zones. In the Pacific, supply lines stretched across thousands of miles of ocean. Cargo ships arrived with steel ribs and corrugated panels, often delayed by storms, enemy submarines, or miscommunication. Untrained soldiers and Seabees became impromptu builders. They hammered, bolted, and curved steel under conditions no engineer could fully anticipate. Mud that sucked at boots, humidity that bent metal, rain that turned the ground to slick clay. On Guadalcanal, the first huts served as hospitals. Injured Marines were carried through the mud and lifted onto stretchers inside these portable homes. Doctors worked under dim lanterns, suturing wounds and administering medicine while bullets and shrapnel screamed overhead. In the same huts, mechanics repaired radios and jeeps, soldiers slept in cramped bunks, and officers planned patrols. The Quonset was more than a building. It was a lifeline, a heartbeat, a temporary city rising from chaos. In North Africa, the desert tested the huts differently. Heat warped the steel panels, sand infiltrated every seam, and sudden storms filled floors with inches of dust and mud. Soldiers learned to seal every edge with ingenuity, using canvas, rope, or whatever materials were at hand. The huts bent, shook, and groaned under environmental stress, but they did not fall. Back in Europe, airfields in England and France saw Quonsets rise almost overnight. Pilots slept beneath them, hearing the roar of engines overhead and dreaming of a home they might never return to. In each hut, simple rituals persisted. Letters were written, coffee brewed, cards played. Amidst the noise of war, the huts provided a small, sacred rhythm of life. But fire and blood are not merely metaphorical in war. Some huts caught stray incendiary rounds. Others collapsed in typhoons or under heavy snow. Every dent and tear was a reminder that survival is provisional, fragile, and hard-earned. Yet men rebuilt, repaired, and reused. Steel, rivets, and determination became armor against both nature and enemy. Stories of human endurance multiplied. One Seabee wrote home, "We're building these huts faster than the planes can fly, but every time we finish one, I see a man sleep in it and survive another day. That's all that matters." Another soldier described his first night in a Quonset on Guadalcanal. The rain hammered the roof. The wind shook the walls. But inside we were alive. And for that night, alive was enough. Even engineers back in Rhode Island followed the reports with anxious fascination. Every flaw discovered in the field led to design tweaks, new materials, and revised assembly instructions. Efficiency became a survival skill. The hut evolved, sidewalls straightened, arches modified, sections reduced from 3 to 2 to speed assembly. The battlefield itself became the ultimate quality control. By 1943, tens of thousands of huts were scattered across the globe. They were hospitals, barracks, workshops, mess halls, and command centers. Soldiers no longer thought of them as mere shelters. They were symbols of continuity in an otherwise chaotic world. Inside each hut, there was a strange duality. Comfort and danger coexisted. Men rested under steel roofs while the world outside burned, proving that even in war, human resilience finds space to exist. The Quonset hut was born of necessity, but in the fire of battle, it became a symbol of human endurance and industrial ingenuity. It taught soldiers to adapt, engineers to anticipate, and commanders to trust that something as simple as steel and bolts could sustain life. Yet for all its utility, the huts were also a reminder of war's cost. Every dented wall, every shrapnel mark, every soaked floor was a silent record of suffering. Each shelter bore witness to the sweat, fear, and courage of those who had touched it. Men and women whose names would never appear in history books, but whose survival mattered profoundly. The half-moon steel structures became a quiet army within the army, standing silently, enduring storms, fire, and the relentless pressure of human conflict. They were unsung heroes of survival, outlasting their makers, outlasting battles, and quietly shaping the lives of thousands. And for those who built, assembled, and slept beneath them, the question lingered, unspoken. When the world burns, can a shelter of steel and sweat ever be enough to keep humanity intact? Autumn 1944, the Philippine Islands. Rain had fallen for weeks, turning the jungle into a sea of mud. Every path, every clearing, every supply line was treacherous. Inside the Quonset huts, soldiers huddled, listening to the relentless storm outside, wondering if the next day would bring relief or more chaos. By 1944, the Quonset hut had become ubiquitous across battlefronts, from Pacific jungles to European airfields. Yet the pressures of war were beginning to reveal its limitations. The original T-rib design, deployed in the early months after Pearl Harbor, had served well under ideal conditions. But in reality, ideal rarely existed. Curved walls extended to the floor, wasting precious space. Bunks pressed awkwardly against slanted metal, tables could not sit flush, and leaks allowed rain and condensation to seep inside. Soldiers found themselves living in what one engineer described as metal coffins. Supply chains struggled to keep pace with demand. Steel shipments were delayed, rivets were lost to storms at sea, and assembly instructions, rushed into print, occasionally caused confusion in the field. Engineers received field reports detailing sagging roofs in Alaska, flooded huts in New Guinea, and war-torn shelters in Europe. Every flaw was a stark reminder that even the best-laid plans could crumble under the weight of war. On Leyte and Mindoro, Quonset huts faced their greatest test yet. Tropical storms flattened roofs, high winds shredded canvas, and soldiers and engineers were forced to rebuild in torrential rain. Men who had once lifted steel panels with hope now lifted them with grim determination, their hands blistered, clothes soaked, and bodies exhausted. Humor persisted, but it was thin, fragile. Jokes about living in barrels were often punctuated with swearing and sighs. Back home, engineers in Rhode Island reviewed field reports with growing concern. The huts were functional, yes, but they had become a reminder of human vulnerability. One memo read, "We can deliver structures anywhere, but the world continues to test them in ways our models did not predict." We are learning that survival is never only about design, it is about adaptation. In Europe, the story was similar. In Normandy, huts built quickly in preparation for D-Day faced muddy fields, flooding, and wind damage. Soldiers improvised with sandbags, planks, and rope to reinforce walls. These same shelters, intended to protect, sometimes tested patience and endurance as much as the enemy did. Yet in every failure there was a lesson. Engineers began modifying designs. Vertical sidewalls replaced some curves, arches were adjusted, and the assembly process was simplified from 3 sections to 2. These changes improved efficiency, reduced wasted space, and made huts easier to erect under extreme conditions. It was a constant dance between necessity and perfection, a war being fought as much in drafting rooms as on beaches and fields. Despite these struggles, the men and women who lived and worked in Quonsets endured. They carried out their daily routines under steel roofs that groaned and shifted, finding small victories in simple things: a dry bunk after a storm, a repaired Jeep, a letter successfully mailed home. Each hut became a microcosm of human resilience, a place where hope and exhaustion coexisted in delicate balance. Human stories multiplied. In New Guinea, a group of soldiers survived a typhoon only because they had reinforced the hut with ropes and poles. In Europe, a young corporal used his wit and a spare canvas to stop water from dripping onto a hospital bed. Engineers sometimes received postcards from soldiers thanking them, not for the war itself, but for providing a roof under which they could survive, rest, and plan for the next day. The fall, then, was not a collapse of the Quonset hut itself. It was the collision of human ambition with the realities of war. Even as these portable structures failed to meet every need, they forced adaptation, ingenuity, and cooperation. They tested the limits of men, women, and machines alike. By winter, the first generation of huts was already being replaced with improved designs. But the legacy of failure remained in every dent, leak, and sagging wall. Soldiers walked through them, remembered the storms they had endured, and learned to respect the quiet strength of a building born of necessity. The question lingered: unspoken yet present in every supply report and battle report. Even when humanity builds faster, stronger, and smarter, can anything truly withstand the relentless weight of war? The huts endured, yes. They survived storms, bullets, and time itself. But in the midst of their survival lay a simple truth. Every structure, every invention, has a breaking point, and every man beneath it eventually confronts his own. August 1945. Across the Pacific, silence had finally settled. The guns had stopped, but the islands were far from peaceful. Quonset huts stood like sentinels in the wreckage, empty, silent, yet echoing with the lives they had sheltered. The war was over. The fighting had ceased. Ships no longer carried soldiers to distant shores, and airplanes no longer roared overhead. But the echo of battle lingered in the air, in the mud, in the scorched earth. And everywhere the soldiers had marched, everywhere they had slept, the Quonset huts remained. They were hollowed by absence, yet alive with memory. Inside, floors were worn smooth by boots, panels dented by storms or stray bullets, and corners filled with the forgotten traces of letters, tools, or discarded uniforms. The men and women who had once lived, fought, and worked under those curved steel roofs were now scattered across oceans and continents. Some returned home with medals and photographs. Others returned with scars that could not be seen, carrying memories of nights spent in fear, exhaustion, and endurance. In the Pacific jungles, huts were used as temporary hospitals for the wounded, even after hostilities ended. Doctors and nurses remained, patching bodies and souls alike, while supply lines struggled to reach remote islands. On Okinawa, huts that had once housed sleeping soldiers became classrooms for orphans and makeshift offices for reconstruction teams. The huts had shifted purpose, yet their steel shells still contained echoes of struggle. Europe, too, bore witness to the aftermath. In Normandy and along the Rhine, Quonset huts sheltered refugees, displaced families, and administrative staff organizing reconstruction. The shelters, once intended for war, now cradled the fragile beginnings of peace. Soldiers recalled nights in these huts when gunfire punctuated the dark. Now they walked through the same spaces in silence, confronting memories they could not fully reconcile. Back in the United States, Quonset huts were dismantled, sold, or repurposed. Communities bought them cheaply, transforming them into garages, workshops, and even churches. Factory gates closed, machines fell silent, and engineers returned to lives quieter than those they had known during the war. Some had witnessed the huts in battle. Others had only imagined their use in the field. All were haunted in some way by the lives their designs had touched. The hut's presence became a bridge between wartime and peacetime. Veterans returning home remembered the shelter and security of the steel shells. The nights of rain and wind when the curved walls were the only protection they had from the elements and the dangers outside. They told stories to children and grandchildren, sometimes softly, sometimes in bursts of laughter or frustration, about the strange comfort of living under metal roofs half a world away. Engineers reflected on their creation with a mix of pride and unease. They had built structures to save lives, but they had also enabled war to continue farther, faster, and more efficiently. They asked themselves whether innovation could ever truly be neutral, whether the same skills that saved lives also prolonged suffering. It was a moral question left unanswered, lingering in drafting rooms and archives long after the machines had stopped. The Quonset huts, once symbols of urgency and efficiency, had now become monuments of endurance. They had survived storms, typhoons, enemy fire, and human fatigue. Yet the silence inside them was heavy, as though the metal itself carried memory. The sweat of hands, the fear of men, the rhythm of survival under impossible conditions. By 1946, tens of thousands of huts remained scattered across the globe, a testament to industrial achievement and human perseverance. Veterans walking past these structures recognized the shape instantly, the half-moon curve, the ribbed steel, symbols of resilience and memory. Some saw them as reminders of hardship, others as evidence of triumph over impossible odds. And yet, for all their endurance, the huts could not erase the cost of war. Every dent, leak, and repair told a story of exhaustion, fear, and survival. In quiet moments, soldiers and engineers alike reflected on the strange duality of their existence. Life preserved within steel, while death and destruction raged outside. The long night was not just a measure of time. It was the period when humanity confronted itself in the aftermath of global conflict. The Quonset huts were witnesses, silent but ever present, marking the boundary between war and peace, between memory and history. For those who had slept, built, or taken refuge within their curved walls, the question lingered: could the lessons of survival, endurance, and human ingenuity truly outlast the wars they had been built to endure? In every empty hut, in every photograph, and in every rusting panel, the answer remained, uncertain, unspoken, and waiting. Spring, 1948. Washington, D.C. Inside a locked archive at the Navy Bureau of Yards and Docks, engineers and historians sifted through stacks of yellowed blueprints, memos, and reports. It was not a war they were revisiting. It was the afterlife of creation itself. After the guns fell silent and the troops returned home, the Quonset hut entered a new phase of scrutiny, a reckoning that went beyond assembly lines and blueprints. Engineers, historians, and military planners began reviewing what had been built, why, and at what cost. The U.S. Navy and Army had demanded 16,000 huts, each one intended to save lives and facilitate rapid deployment. Engineers had responded with precision, ingenuity, and unrelenting labor. Yet in the quiet aftermath, questions emerged. Was speed more important than comfort? Efficiency more critical than durability? Could a structure designed for battle leave a lasting imprint on human experience beyond survival? Archives revealed the pressures of creation. Memos detailed sleepless nights, exhausted draftsmen, and repeated design failures. One engineer noted, "We thought we were racing the clock, but in reality, we were racing ourselves." Each drawing carried a life, and each bolt might save one or leave another exposed. Letters from the field underscored the human cost. Soldiers wrote of nights spent in half-constructed huts during storms, of small victories that balanced exhaustion, of camaraderie forged under steel roofs. Yet some letters hinted at deeper unease, the awareness that efficiency in war could blur the line between necessity and prolongation. The redesigns, vertical sidewalls, two-section assembly, modified arches, improved functionality, but they also revealed a larger truth. War demands constant adaptation, and adaptation carries moral weight. Every correction made life easier for some, but it also enabled military operations to continue, sometimes into environments where survival itself was uncertain. Historians examining post-war deployments noted a pattern. The huts had migrated beyond their original purpose. Hospitals, schools, workshops, and offices replaced barracks and mess halls. They became tools of reconstruction and stability. Yet their origin was unmistakable. Born from conflict, refined under urgency, tested by danger. The engineers themselves were changed. Some took pride in their work, understanding that their designs had preserved thousands of lives. Others could not escape a lingering guilt, the sense that they had enabled war to proceed more efficiently, that their innovations, however life-saving, had contributed to prolonged suffering. In quiet moments, they reflected on the paradox: creation for protection, yet creation intertwined with destruction. In Quonset Point, the factory gates were silent. Machines that had clanged day and night now lay dormant, rust forming along steel. Engineers who had once rushed to perfect arches and rivets walked among their own memories, confronting what their work had wrought. One veteran wrote, "We built shelters to save men. But in doing so, we built war's mobility, its speed, its persistence." How do we measure our success? By lives saved or by wars made possible? Military records confirmed what the engineers already knew. The Quonset hut had become an invisible backbone of the U.S. military, deployed in Korea, Europe, Alaska, and the Pacific. Its efficiency shaped operational strategy. It enabled rapid deployment and extended endurance. And yet, as its use spread, so did the realization that technological achievement cannot be disentangled from moral consequence. Survivors, too, wrestled with memory. Veterans recalled the simple steel shelters as sites of life and fear. Under their roofs, men shared moments of laughter, wrote letters, prayed, and endured. Yet each hut also reminded them of the dangers just beyond its walls: bombs, bullets, disease, and exhaustion. In many ways, the huts were mirrors, reflecting both ingenuity and vulnerability, survival and mortality. The reckoning extended beyond the battlefield. As Quonsets were repurposed in peacetime, they carried echoes of war into ordinary life. Communities using them for schools, churches, or homes were unknowingly inheriting fragments of human endurance, fatigue, and ingenuity. Every bolt and panel was a reminder of a world shaped under extraordinary pressure. Ultimately, the Quonset hut's legacy is dual. It represents the triumph of human innovation under pressure and the unavoidable shadow of war that innovation carries. It is a lesson in the complexity of progress, that even when creating to protect, one cannot separate engineering from ethics, efficiency from consequence. And in that quiet reflection, history whispers its unanswerable question. When we create to save lives, do we also create the machinery of future conflict? In the archives, in the empty factories, and in the memories of those who lived beneath the steel shells, the question lingers. The Quonset hut, unglamorous yet indispensable, embodies both the power and the burden of human ingenuity in war. Spring, 1965, Washington, D.C. Among glass cases of medals, rifles, and faded photographs, a small model of a half-moon Quonset hut rests under a spotlight. Visitors pass by, some pausing, most unaware. It is quiet, unassuming, yet it carries the weight of thousands of lives and the silent endurance of a world at war. The Quonset hut survived war and history alike. It outlasted soldiers, engineers, factories, and blueprints. It became more than a shelter. It became a symbol of industrial ingenuity, human endurance, and the quiet persistence of memory. Across the United States, the huts were repurposed. Communities transformed them into schools, workshops, garages, and churches. Airfields, training bases, and remote outposts retained them. In Alaska, in Vietnam, in Europe, the steel shells continued to serve, a testament to practicality, adaptability, and durability. Veterans remembered them vividly. They remembered nights of rain beating against corrugated steel, of wind rattling panels, of conversations whispered in the dark. Some remembered fear. Others remembered laughter, camaraderie, and survival. In every memory, the Quonset hut represented the intersection of ordinary life and extraordinary circumstance. Historians reflect on the Quonset hut as a lesson in war beyond battles. It is a story of logistics, of human innovation, and of the often invisible acts that sustain armies and shape conflicts. Whereas tanks, planes, and artillery dominate history books, the humble hut carried the weight of lives and operations alike. It cradled strategy, recovery, and endurance in a form so unassuming that its significance could easily be overlooked. The huts also carried the moral complexity of war. Designed to save lives, they simultaneously enabled rapid deployment, efficient operations, and prolonged campaigns. Engineers who built them understood this tension. Soldiers who lived in them experienced it, and history, looking back decades later, carries the echoes of both achievement and unease. Photographs and archives capture them now. Half-moons of steel rising from muddy fields, jungle clearings, or airstrips. Rust and wear mark the passage of decades, yet their forms remain instantly recognizable. They are both relics and living structures, enduring far beyond the fleeting attention of headlines or parades. At Quonset Point, where the first huts were designed and tested, the factories have long closed. Machines are silent. Blueprints rest in dusty archives. Engineers have passed, some quietly, some without recognition. Yet their work continues, in the structures themselves, in the efficiency they enabled, in the countless lives sheltered beneath curved steel roofs. The legacy of the Quonset hut is both practical and symbolic. Practically, it changed military logistics forever. It allowed armies to move faster, adapt to diverse environments, and provide shelter efficiently. Symbolically, it stands as a reminder of human ingenuity under pressure, a testament to what can be achieved when necessity meets design, and to the moral questions that follow innovation born in conflict. Some huts remain abandoned, their steel warped, paint peeling, interiors empty. Others thrive in new roles, teaching children, sheltering families, or housing workshops. Each carries memory, the weight of war, the presence of those who endured it, the echo of hands that hammered, riveted, and assembled. They are witnesses to a time when survival depended not only on courage and weaponry, but also on ingenuity, sweat, and perseverance. The story of the Quonset hut reminds us that history is not only written in battles and leaders, it is written in shelters that survived storms, in engineers who worked through exhaustion, in soldiers who found brief reprieve beneath steel roofs. Memory persists in these spaces, quieter than the roar of combat, but no less profound. In museums and archives, in abandoned fields and active bases, the huts endure. They remind us that war leaves traces in both the monumental and the modest. Victory is measured not only in territory or artillery, but in the shelters that protect, the innovations that sustain, and the lives quietly preserved. As visitors pass the small Quonset model under the museum spotlight, many do not notice. But for those who understand, it is a vessel of memory, endurance, and reflection. The hut stands as a reminder that war does not vanish. It shapes, transforms, and persists, in steel, in memory, and in human consciousness. And as history records battles, leaders, and strategies, the Quonset hut remains a silent witness, asking the final question: war doesn't vanish. It changes its shape and waits to be rediscovered.